Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Steve Ciobo. He's in Brisbane today. And Labor's Julie Owens, who's in Sydney. Welcome to both of you. Steve Ciobo, Sharman Stone isn't being just a staunch local defender of jobs. She's actually accusing the Prime Minister of lying. Has she gone too far?
Well, look, Greg, I think that Sharman Stone is a passionate local federal member. She's an advocate for her community, as I think every Australian would expect her to be. That's what members of Parliament are meant to do, and it's understandable that she's very passionate about this issue because it affects her constituents greatly. In terms of the realities, though, about the industrial relations framework and in particular the EBA that applies here with SPC, I think it's important to realise that that is one factor, not the sole factor, one factor that's clearly putting pressure on SPC when it comes to the profitability of the company. The Prime Minister made remarks around the EBA. They weren't confined to the EBA, but he simply highlighted what is a common sense threshold, which is that if a business is already struggling, if their cost base is already high, then allowances and entitlements that go far and above what the award is are putting extra pressure on a business that is already under pressure.
Yet he did put it front and centre at that media conference on the Thursday immediately after Cabinet. It was up there along with the profitability of Coca-Cola Amatil as something that would greatly enhance the company. So you're walking away from that list that he gave of overly generous conditions?
No, I mean, the facts are the facts, and people are able to look for themselves about what is contained within the EBA, and the simple, I guess, principle upon which the comments are based are this. If a company is already doing it tough, if a company is already finding itself under intense pressure, if there's already a drain on financial resources, then a generous cost base, and in this particular case, a certain generous, a range of agreements under the EBA, over and above the award, are going to put additional pressure on a company that's already doing it tough. Now, what we're trying to do as a government...
Julie Owens, I will come to you in a moment with a question from your perspective, but shortly before we came on air, Steve Ciobo, SPC Ardmona did release its own media statement. I have it here, trying to rebut benefit by benefit what some of those allowances are and how much has been paid. So in summary, it says the total cost of allowances for all staff for the entire year of 2013 was $116,000, which represents less than 0.1% of total business costs for the year. I mean, it sounds like very much an argument at the margins, isn't it, if that is the cost structure built around these allowances?
Well, I think it's an argument that's entirely consistent with the point that I made, which is that this is but one factor. That's what I said to you from the outset. The reality is that, and this is the point I was going to before, what we are trying to attempt to do as a government is to make changes to improve business conditions in this country. We recognise that for there to be a long-term, sustainable future for not only Australian manufacturing, but indeed for all Australian employees, we need to create the right business conditions that see a reduction of business costs relative to our competitors. And perhaps the clearest example of this is the carbon tax, and we've spoken about it at length. That was an unnecessary impost on Australian businesses that made us less competitive. We're trying to abolish the carbon tax. Labor and the Greens stand in our way. Likewise, our point was simply to say that when it comes to, for example, an EBA, if it's over and above the award, then that's additional cost for business. We've never said it's the only factor. We have, however, said that it is one of the factors.
All right, Julie Owens, let's bring you in at this point. Labor seems to be coming at this from a perspective that says this is actually about a not so subtle industrial relations campaign. Is that the claim that you're still trying to make?
Well, there's no doubt that Tony Abbott put it absolutely front and centre. It's the workers' fault when it comes to SPC Ardmona, and it was the workers' fault when it came to Holden. So, people can make their own judgments about that. But I think the sad thing about this, apart from the extraordinary damage that the loss of SPC will do to Sharman Stone's electorate, is the damage it will do to Australia's future as a producer of food. we should be looking as a country to growing our food production, not shrinking it. And it's unfortunate that we have a government at the moment that is so mired in their anti-worker ideology that they can't look at the big picture. The growing middle classes in China and India will want food which is guaranteed good quality, clean, without toxins. They will want that. We are in a position in the world with expertise in this country where we should be building on this.
Julie, we also have a government which is mired in debt at the moment, and it's made the case that it would have to borrow that money to support Coca-Cola Amatil. Is that justified in the current budgetary environment?
Well, governments make decisions. They've announced $20 million for marriage counselling, for example. There are much more going to the paid parental leave scheme. So they make their choices. They make their choices like all governments do, and they've chosen at this point to give $17 million to Cadbury in Tasmania, none to SPC, $20 million for marriage counselling. So, they're the government, they're making the choices. Manufacturing clearly is not a priority for them.
And you've got Victorian Labor stumping up with a promise of $30 million. Presumably that's something that Labor thinks they can afford to borrow?
Well, that's the Victorian Labor opposition has made that promise, so they can speak for themselves. But it's good to see people coming forward, to support, a community that will be in quite a lot of distress. There really isn't another employer of that size in that area. You take SPC out, and not only do you put a lot of people out of work, and the government will have to find the money for the unemployment payments on that, but you'll also see a lot of farmers without a market for theirs, so they can find ways to try and subsidise those, I guess, if you believe what's happening in Cabinet at the moment with Barnaby Joyce. Who knows? The inconsistencies here are quite extraordinary. Money for chocolate, but not for manufacturing, not for food production, not for cars, money for marriage counselling. It's all there when they want it. It's not there for these items.
Let's talk, Steve Ciobo, about the broader philosophy at play here. It's not just about SPC Ardmona, is it? This is really wrapped up in the end of the age of entitlement position, which the Treasurer has been espousing himself again as recently as yesterday. Is that a brand new approach that we're bringing to industry assistance, and one that you can stand by hard and fast to all industries over time?
Well, what it is certainly a different approach, Greg, to the approach that was adopted by Labor over the last 6 years. Now, I heard Julie's comments about how she'd like to see more money being borrowed to be spent on SPC, and I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that Labor is out there calling for us to continue borrowing money and calling for us to continue spending money, because that's entirely consistent with Labor's approach over the last 6 years.
Steve.
But the reality is that Labor's failed approach put Australia on a pathway where we are $123 billion of budget deficits over the next 4 years, $667 billion of debt, over $500 billion worth of debt that Labor's left us. So our approach definitely is different to the previous government. We are about sustainability, and that's why we say it's not about borrowing more money to give to Coca-Cola Amatil, a company that in the first 6 months of this year made over $200 million of profit prior to paying tax. I should say that's after paying tax. So we sort of think that Australian taxpayers probably need to be given a bit of a break, less borrowing, and Labor likes to talk about this big word called co-investment. They always say how everything's a co-investment by taxpayers, but you know what, Greg? Labor borrowed $215 million. The former Labor Prime Minister, Julie Gillard, stood up and said, this secures for the next decade Holden's future in the country. And then guess what? Holden still pulled the pin anyway, even though the Labor Party promised through co-investment that they were going to secure Holden's future for 10 years.
Julie Owens, is that a legacy
Labor's
that you're prepared to defend, those promises which ultimately weren't delivered?
Sorry, say that again.
Is that a legacy, that Labor's legacy of promises that Steve Ciobo's identifying there? He does specifically cite one that relates to Holden. Is that a legacy of industry policy that Labor defends, the current caucus?
Look, I do defend the support we gave to industry over many years, and we did it in the Hawke-Keating era as well with the car plan. In fact, there's been an incredible amount of work done in those areas, and I believe that it's government's job to do that. Steve Ciobo talks about the taxpayer, but the people in the Goulburn Valley. The people who will lose their jobs with SPC, the people that will go on the dole queue, are also taxpayers.
And they haven't shut it down yet, Julie.
And taxpayers...
They haven't shut it down. You don't know that's going to happen. You're trying to run a scare campaign and you should stop it.
Oh. Oh, please. Oh, please. Tony Abbott's statements were completely clear on Thursday, completely clear that there will be no support for SPC. It's completely clear. Just as Joe Hockey was completely clear about Holden, they're basically daring companies to walk away. They're just daring it. I mean, I don't need a scare campaign. I've got Tony Abbott out there talking about the end of
well, let's change direction on that note, Julie Owens. We do have the Royal Commission into the Home Insulation Program really gathering speed now and starting to issue subpoenas to people that would like to hear from, and reports suggest that senior ministers from the former government, along with Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, are on that list. The list apparently numbers 95 in total. That's the number of people that the inquiry has asked to attend. Should the former Prime Ministers front that commission? Julie Owens.
Sorry, you asked, I don't quite have the monitor here. The Commission can ask anyone to appear that it wishes to appear. That's its right. So I really don't have anything to say about it. It's their right.
Has Labor anything to fear from what might come out of that?
Well, I don't believe we do. I think it's a shame, though, that with another inquiry into the Pink Bats program, and there have been several already, including 2 coronial inquiries and 3 prosecutions, that we don't have an inquiry that is actually looking into the key issue here, which is workplace safety. I mean, there were 210 deaths in the workplace in 2012. That's an incredible number of people who lose their lives in the workplace. There were 4 in the home insulation program, which is a terrible thing. And it's completely appropriate to have inquiries into how to make workplaces safer. So, you know, by all means, let's inquire into the safety aspects. That would be a good thing. It's just a shame that this particular inquiry has narrowed its focus so far. But they can call, you know, anyone they want. That's their right.
And Steve Ciobo, given that position of Labor, that they're not opposed to any participation in this as long as it's about occupational health and safety, is that an assurance that can be given that it's not a political witch hunt?
Well, look, I mean, it's not a political witch hunt, and the reality is that it's being delivered in terms of the Commission by Justice Hanger. So we see a situation where, like previous Royal Commissions, what this one does means that we lift the lid on all aspects. And I think that's really important, Greg, because at the end of the day, this issue really centres around a government policy. And doesn't matter which side of government, whether it's Liberal or Labor, that you talk about. It's not about that. It is about a government policy that tragically resulted in deaths. And they were deaths that could have been prevented. They're deaths that were a consequence of the rapid deployment of the policy in an inappropriate way. And I think it's really important that not only this government, but all future governments understand and learn from this Royal Commission what happened, what went wrong, what steps could have been done to prevent it in the future. And if we do that, then the nation is going to be stronger for it.
All right, well, Steve Ciobo, thank you. And before him,
Pleasure.
Julie Owens, for joining us as well today. And that's all from Parliament House for now. There has been a cabinet meeting held throughout the day. We're not sure what, if anything, will come from the conclusion of that. But for now, it's back to Joe O'Brien.